Purple Warriors podcast. I'm your host, Ali Sugars, and thank you for joining us. This podcast is about raising awareness for domestic and family abuse by allowing survivors to share their own journeys to recovery. You will find practical yet powerful information and tools that you can immediately implement into your own journey to recovery. You will also hear information on how you can help someone you suspect may be in a toxic relationship. To support this podcast and get access to amazing bonus content, click Become a Patron for more information. If you have a story to share, reach out to me, Ali F. Sugars, on Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. Hosts and guests will often discuss sensitive topics in detail. While this is done with the utmost respect and dignity, this may cause triggers for some listeners. Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of the Purple Warriors podcast. I'm so glad you can join us. And so now, at the beginning of the year, when we upped the ante of this podcast a little bit, I did say that no topic was off limits. And today we are going to talk about a subject that is not very often talked about, but it is certainly something that is important and it needs to be addressed. And that is wills and why we should have one. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Brendan Murphy from Will HQ. Hi Brendan, how are you going?
Hi Ali, lovely to be here. Thank you.
That's all right. It is lovely to have you here and I'm very, very much looking forward to our conversation today because it is an important one that needs to be had. So tell us a little bit about you, Brendan, and what it is that you do and what Will HQ is all about.
Well, look, as you say, it is an important topic. And at the same time, because it's important, you try and keep it a little bit lighthearted as well, so that the message gets across without necessarily all the baggage that goes with it. So a will, everybody knows what a will is. No need to define it. A will is a document in which you leave your worldly goods to whoever you choose to leave it. And I've got a general business background. Originally, I'm an accountant. I'm still taking the pills, but I'm nearly better at this stage. I've worked with one very, very large company for a long time, IBM, run my own businesses for a bunch of years, both in Ireland and here in Australia. But the whole will thing came about a little more than a year ago when myself and my wife were out with friends who happened to mention that they were updating their wills. When we came home, I went to make sure that our wills, which we had done as we should, were in the filing cabinets at home where they should be, to find that the one we had was 20 years out of date, or the two we had were 20 years out of date, living in Ireland, no kids, different business, bunch of parents alive, bunch of inheritors who actually had long gone from our lives, etc. You get the idea.
Yeah.
So we had a valid will, but the penny dropped very quickly. It was sitting in a lawyer's office in suburban Dublin. And if we had been hit by that proverbial bus here in Western Australia, that will would never have been found by a human being. And we effectively would have died with 2 kids under the age of 18 and a mess left behind us. So that kicked it off. And I know we go through the conversation, but it really kicked off a bunch of things to educate myself on what was involved in the whole process of will making. And then when I realized that there was a society-related issue, and this is where you want to get a little bit serious, but not deep. I just said I need to actually address this because there were no tools that I could use to fix the problem I saw. And of course, we'll come to that as we chat now.
Yeah, right. Okay. So what is Will HQ all about? Tell us.
Right. Well, look, the first thing to say is a will is a legal document. I'm not a lawyer and neither I nor Will HQ give legal advice. End of story. However, it is a very simple document. What you got, and I'm framing this now, so please just follow me for a touch if you don't mind. What you need to do to make a will is you need to identify yourself. You need to nominate an executor. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what an executor is. You clearly need to specify at least one beneficiary and what you're going to leave them. Then you need to sign and date the will. and you need to correctly witness the will so that your signature is validated. Now, of course it gets complex, but at its core, a will is a very, very simple document. So what we have done in Will HQ is we've created an online web application to allow you to create a simple will. I'll come back to that phrase, but much more importantly, to manage the will, because the bit that I found that was missing is we had a will. We had 2 wills. In fact, if you want to go back through it, we've had a bunch of wills, but we never had a regular reminder to update the wills. We told my wife's brother and my brother that, you know, they were involved both as executors, and we asked them to be guardians of our kids if that ever was needed. So we verbally told them, but we didn't remind them. And there were all these little things that you would do if you were planning your life properly. But I said to my brother many years ago, look, if I pop my clogs, will you and Orla be guardians to the kids? And he said, oh, yeah. And promptly forgot about it, as did I. So to remind people of these things is a function. So management is communicating your will, communicating that you have a will, making sure that it's secure, that there is no confusion over versions, protecting against fraud, getting annual reminders to review and update. And, you know, the bottom line is this is not in any sense trying to cut lawyers out of the equation, because they are essential. But the big issue is that at least half the adult population in this country and further afield have no will, and dying without one leaves huge stress and mess for the people left behind. So I really wanted to get involved in addressing that.
Yeah, and that is a big reason, you know, why I wanted to bring you on the show today, because in my life, I do have someone who has gone through the situation where a significant other has passed away, and that person did have a will, but unfortunately it was unsigned at the time because it was a long-term illness and there just wasn't that time to actually get the will signed. So this is why I really wanted to come and talk to you today about the importance of having the will.
Let me kind of give you one of my little stories, and it's not a little story about an unsigned will. Here's something maybe educational and amusing at the same time. In 1798, 222 years ago, the richest commoner in England died. His name was William Jennings. So he wasn't an aristocrat. He wasn't part of the royalty, etc. But he was worth, in our terms, he was a billionaire. And when he died, he had an unsigned will. And he had been apparently on his way to the lawyers that morning, but he forgot his spectacles, so he didn't get the will signed on the day. So he died without a will. Now, this story goes on a while, so I'll try and shorten it. The court, after a little while, appointed someone to be the guardian of his estate, to be the administrator of his estate, who was not a relative, but someone who was associated with him. A relative could have inherited. Because when you've got $1 billion at your fingertips, it's probably a little difficult to resist that. And after a while, other lawyers got involved, and she was ejected from the situation. So a few years have gone past now. 50 years later, some American lawyers got hold of this, because apparently he had some American relatives at some stage, and they formed one of the first class actions in history. So they tried to gather everybody in the US at the time with the name Jennings to get a share of the estate. And at this stage, the court had appointed lawyers to defend the estate. So the lawyers were going back and forth, and you know where this is going. In 1913, 115 years after he died, the estate ran out of money because 100% of it went to the lawyers, left, right, and center.
Wow. I don't know why I'm surprised. My goodness. And yes, and like I'm saying, this person that I'm talking about, yes, that certainly hasn't been that extent. I know there has been a lot of stuff that has had to go on in the background to try and sort out the situation, but definitely not to that extent. But My goodness, that is just, it's incredible and a bit ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah. And look, these things are educational. It gives us messages, and because we're stupid as human beings, we smile at it, but we don't actually take action. So what we're doing is we're trying to give people a tool so they can do something conveniently, in a human way, inexpensively. And I'm terrible. My wife is the really organized one of the pair of us, and things get done in this house not because I do them, but because either my wife does them or she gently reminds me that maybe I should do something I promised to do 6 months ago. So why not use technology to replace that? None of us like, my wife doesn't, in any sense, she does me a favor, not the other way around. But if you have a calendar, a reminder, a bit of technology, let's make our lives easy, and let's do simple things simply if we can.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant idea. So I know that you have answered this question a little bit already, but let's dive a little bit more into the meat of the conversation. So why is it important for someone to make a will?
There you go. Look, that's exactly right. This is the nub of the question. There are two basic reasons. One is a positive reason and one is a negative reason. The positive reason is very simply, this is the only way that you can determine who will get your worldly goods after you pass. And despite the fact that none of us believe we're really going to die, well, eventually we all do. So the will is the only way you can do that. There is no exception to that statement.
Yeah.
Negative reason is if you don't, the rules come into play. And of course, the law has to be there. It's called intestacy. It's a little bit of a whatever word, but if you die intestate without a will, the law in your state, territory, country comes into play and determines how your worldly goods will be passed on. And what that means is that your wishes and the law might conflict. And in that case, as was sung many, many times, if I fight with the law will always win. So make a will. Those are the reasons to make a will.
And again, I'm going to back you right up there because that's exactly what happened to the person that I know as well. So is intestate, did you say? I don't understand the terminology, but...
Yeah, it's a very strange word. It is a short word, but in fact, when I wrote it to someone else early this morning, he came back and he said, "Did you say interstate?" And I said, "No, it's intestate." And for anyone who's Latin, obviously that's where it must have come from originally, like most things legal.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so obviously, you have come across and I have come across people that don't make wills, and this is why we're here today. So what are some of the main reasons why people wouldn't make a will?
Well, look, the obvious answer is because we're human and because we're not very good at stuff. And if you kind of think of it in some way, you ask a person, how did the last 10 years go? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say really, really quickly. And you ask someone, how is the next 10 years going to go? And they'll say, oh God, I can't think, that's so far ahead. I just can't. So people don't think in any kind of structured fashion. We are disorganized. We like to concentrate on the things we enjoy. We don't like to eat the nasties first thing. We like to eat the dessert before we actually get to the healthy food, all of that stuff. So people put it off. And legitimately, most people put it off because most people don't die until they're very, very old and hopefully very, very old. But as a result, the mindset is we're going to live forever. And the second major reason is, well, look, I don't have kids, I don't have assets, I don't have anything to leave, which forgets that in Australia in particular, virtually everybody employed has superannuation and possibly life assurance. And of course, every situation is different. But if you've got a car and $500 in the bank will actually freeze your account by law when you die, and you need some legal process for someone to get that $500. You can't just give the car to your next door neighbor or your nephew the title has to be changed in some fashion as well. So that's at the low end of the spectrum. And people need to organize that. And then, you know, the understandable but difficult one is the cost and expense of doing one with a lawyer, because we're very supportive of the need for lawyers. The law is a complex beast, and what we are doing is called a simple will. And a simple will means that you're going to leave your worldly goods to your direct family in a very equitable fashion, and maybe a little bit extra to good causes or whatever, but no complexities. You need to go to a lawyer if there are complexities. And strangely enough, people are very reluctant to go to lawyers. They can be expensive. It can take time. You have to organize appointments and all of that. So there's an inconvenience aspect. And again, humans don't like inconvenience. We like things being brought to our doorsteps. So now, not only can you have Siri and Alexa and everything else, you could have them in your favorite accent. So, you know, now we're kind of getting into how technology makes our lives easier, but we haven't got all the way there yet. You can transfer $1 billion building in this country without a single piece of paper, a single original signature, or a single handshake, old-fashioned and all as that is. But you have to put a will on paper with original signatures of both you and your witnesses. So, you know, the reasons we don't, we're not going to die: inconvenience, cost, timing. That's it.
Wow. Okay. So a couple of questions there. First of all, now you said, you know, that a will has to be on a piece of paper. So are you saying basically that, you know, if we were going to go online and do a will, it couldn't be signed through something like a program called DocuSign? It can't be
Correct.
signed digitally. It has to be on a piece of paper.
Correct. So going back to my friend, Mr. Jennings from 1798, the practice of wills has really not changed since that time. Of course, there have been some updates to guidelines and values, but you have to have a will on a piece of paper. Your signature has to be an original, and your witnesses' signatures have to be original as well. And of course, there is a chink in the woodwork here, in that during the recent crisis, which still is going on, the virus, in New South Wales at least, they made an exception so that wills could be witnessed remotely. And that clearly was to take account of the fact that people were prospectively on their way out and they realized they had to do a will. So we're a startup company. We are providing a service. We do have a plan. We've got a lot going on. And one of the things that we either want to influence or want to see is the use of technology to securely identify both the will maker and the witnesses of the wills. Because, you know, you have to be a person to make a will, and you should have witnesses to make the will. But is it necessary if your witness is going to be standing next to you or on a secure server? And my answer to that is, having a witness next to you hasn't stopped fraud and confusion for the last 200 years. So I think technology can improve that.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Yeah, and the other point that I wanted to make too is you said that when it doesn't matter how young we are, everybody needs a will. And I'm going to assume that once you turn 18, it is something that you would suggest people do once they become adults, because you just never know. And this sounds so depressing to talk about, but, you know, and particularly for the listeners of this podcast, and, you know, I said nothing is off limits, so I'm just going to put it out there. Unfortunately, and we know there have been circumstances in Australia recently when there have been people who have unfortunately passed away from domestic violence.
Yeah.
So having a will is imperative in that situation, no matter how old or how young you are.
Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
Totally aware of your audience and what you're doing, Ali. And in the context of what's going on around the world at the moment, I'd certainly hope that things are going to improve as people become more educated, not just on the racism thing, but the domestic violence thing. is something that most of us wouldn't have been aware of when I was a kid. And look, I've been around a chunk of time. I was a kid in the 60s and the 70s, and just wasn't recognized as something that went on. At least it's recognized now, and hopefully that leads to improvements over time. But that's little consolation to anybody who's has suffered or is suffering from it. In my context, I'd say a couple of things. If someone makes a will, someone who's in an abusive relationship or has been in an abusive relationship, or someone who is intimidated in any way, it's something that can be completely confidential and personal to that individual. Nobody needs to be informed of a will. Even when you make a will, and this is hopefully something that comes across, your signature is being witnessed. You do not have to tell the person who's witnessing your signature that it's a will. The way our document is printed out, and it's deliberately designed that way, there's a signature page at the back which identifies me or you or anybody else, and you sign it and you date it, and then there are 2 spaces for witnesses. So you are asking them to witness your signature. You are not telling them anything about what the document is. As far as they're concerned, it could be a license for a kangaroo farm. So, make a will. We're trying to do this so clearly it's inexpensive. You can do it on your phone. Now, our technology is at first stage, and it works, it's simple, it's easy to use. It's easier to use on a larger screen than a phone, but you can make it on a phone. You could go down and sit on the rocks by the seafront and, just put in some information to protect your kids, your family, your loved ones, etc. And I am absolutely willing to talk to anybody, whether it's by email or even in person, to try and point them in the right direction, stressing I do not give legal advice, and I do not have experience of what you're talking about. But in my tiny little niche, if I can add any value to anyone's circumstances, I'd be very happy to do so.
Thank you, Brendan. We do very much appreciate that on behalf of everybody. I needed to just put that out there. And you said that so people don't need to know what they're signing. If someone is still in a relationship with an abuser,
yeah.
Does that significant other have to be the one to sign the will, or can a survivor choose someone else to A, witness the will, and maybe B, be an executor of the will?
Yes. Your executor, to start with that, is your personal choice. Your beneficiaries are your personal choice. Now, if the abuser is a legal member of the family, so conventionally, the husband, partner, male member of the family, I would recommend that people talk to lawyers, because wills can be challenged as well. But in terms of what you are saying is that if you made a will online, you do not have to tell one other living human being what you have done. To stretch the point a bit, you could get the school crossing guard to witness your signature. You could go to your local shopkeeper, kangaroo farmer, priest. And sometimes maybe you don't necessarily want to get someone close to you to witness the will, because one of the things that human beings love to do as well is talk. So maybe you just actually get someone, a work colleague. I did this. I actually, going through, obviously, you'll guess now, in building and testing this application, I've done 1,000 versions of a will over the past year. And I've regularly gone along to people in the office building in which I worked, and I said, look, here's a signature page. I'm signing in front of you. Will you sign to witness my signature? And every single time, people go, yeah. I'm just witnessing your signature. So witnessing a signature and making a will are 2 completely different functions.
Right, that makes total sense, because, for instance, when you go and apply for a passport, you just say to someone, I need you to witness my photo, and just sign there. You don't necessarily need to.
That's it. That's precisely, that's a good comparison.
Right, excellent. Now, you have also kind of already answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, you know, is it essential to have a lawyer to set up a will?
No, it's not. Full stop, no, it's not. I've explained what a will is. It's a simple document. Our documentation has been drawn up by lawyers, as you'd expect, and is suitable for, let's just say, most simple circumstances. If you want to complicate how you leave your belongings, you know, you leave and I do not want to in any sense give too much of a live example because it strays into legal advice, which we can't do, which we won't do, but can't do. But for example, if one simple circumstance, if you wanted to leave all your worldly goods to one child and not another, you really got to go to a lawyer, because that's going to be grounds for a challenge, and only a lawyer can protect you from that, and not even always from that. But if your circumstances are such that you want to leave your goods to your direct family, and quite often people want to give instructions about their funeral, I want to be buried, I want to be burned, organ donations, all those simple things are catered for. And I'm very conscious as well about the cost, and that someone in an abusive situation may not have $500 or $1,000 to go to a lawyer. There is always the legal advice bureaus available, and people should make use of them. But it's always better to have a will than not a will. You are better off sitting at your kitchen table and writing. So I gave you the longest legal case that I'm aware of for 115 years. Let me give you the opposite. There are 2 recorded wills in recent legal history. One was in Germany and one was in England. And it doesn't matter, they're different jurisdictions because the rules are very roughly the same. The one in Germany was 3 words. It actually said, all to wife. The one in India did the same. It said, all to son. Both were signed, dated, and witnessed correctly, and both were accepted by the courts, because when you look at the substance, that the person who made a will was very clear what they were doing and who they were doing it for, and they followed the legal procedure, signing and dating. Now, that's not to be recommended, but it's better to have a will than no will. So, you know, people got to, you know, look after themselves, look after their families, look after their situation. And people got to be practical as well.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. Okay, now, let's talk numbers. Now, some people might go, oh, God, numbers are boring stuff. But let's talk numbers anyway. Let's do it.
Yeah. You get me excited now, Ali. Obviously, given my background, I got a few numbers in my back pocket. So this is one of the reasons that we've built the application as well. Australia rounded as a population of 25 million people. There are roughly kind of 21 million adults in the population. At least half do not have a will. But that's not important, because a will doesn't matter until you personally leave this planet. What is important is that around 160,000 people die in Australia every year in a normal year. And about a quarter of those die prematurely, and that's under the age of 70. Of those, half die without a will. So statistically, 20,000 people die every year in this country without a will. And because it takes a bunch of time to get through the legal process to sort out the estate, statistically, about 50,000 sets of families, heirs, loved ones, inheritors are at the mercy of the legal system because their loved one died without a will. So it's too much. It's an enormous problem. The numbers are the same in New Zealand proportionally. You know where my accent is from. It's the same in Ireland. It's the same in the UK. Around the world, we're all pretty slow at getting this stuff right. So in Australia, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 people in their 20s die every year. Now, almost by definition, the vast majority of those will not have a will. The number doubles for people in their 30s. And anyone who's hit the age of 40, which for me is a while ago, still considers themselves very much part of the live and active human race. But in their 40s, the numbers go through the roof, 50s, 60s, and we all know 60, 70, and even 80-year-olds who are full of beans and have a long way to go. So it's a small thing. It's a small curable thing, but people should think about wills sooner rather than later, now that we've made it effective, inexpensive, and convenient.
Absolutely. And look, honestly, I am in my mid to late 40s.
But then never.
But it is honestly starting to dawn on me that, hang on a minute, you're pretty well middle-aged, love. Let's check in with reality a bit. So, you and I will definitely be talking after this interview. Don't you worry about that. But, it does. You're right. It does hit home when you get to a certain age. So, yes, I do look forward to our chat after this. So I know that you have a milestone that you are wanting to reach.
Yes.
Share what that is, because I think this is incredible.
To use an Australian term, I'm an ambitious bastard to get this right. I want to sign up 1 million Australians to make a will over the next 7 years. Now, it's going to take 7 years, and I suspect the timescale will be tight at the end of it. But while that's an enormous goal, I kind of decided to write it down and to speak it out loud for the simple reason that if I play around the edges of this, it's not going to address the issue. It simply isn't going to do it. If I can, with your help, Ali, with your listeners' help, and everybody else who gets involved, if I can actually get people to use my service, that helps me to push it forward. But if I get people to go to Australia Post and pick up a paper will and make one there, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant, because any will is better than no will, without any question. And even if I hit 1 million people on our service over the next 7 years, that's less than 10% of the people who don't have a will.
Yeah.
It is a big issue. So yeah, I've put my head on the guillotine, and I've said that I'm going to talk to anybody, anywhere who can help, and I will do whatever is legal, ethical, moral, effective to try and get this message across and educate people as much as, get them to sign a piece of paper.
Excellent. Thank you so much. From someone like me, who has watched someone very close to me go through the circumstances of when a significant other hasn't had a will, I very much appreciate what you do. And it has, talking to you, the couple of times I have certainly brought it to the forefront of my mind. So thank you. Thank you on behalf of our listeners as well. Now, Brendan, tell people how, if they're interested in coming and using your services, how they can get in contact with you.
Okay, well, look, the simplest way is via the website, which is simply willhq.com, willhq.com. That gets you into it gives you information, gets you into the application. Anybody who wants to email me directly, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'm Brendan, BRENDAN, at willhq.com. And I will do I know you have thousands of listeners, Ali, and I whether it's one person or 1,000 people, I will respond to everybody, even if it takes me a little bit of time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brendan. It has been a privilege speaking to you today, and I'm certainly going to advocate for you and get your message out there, and hopefully our listeners will do the same. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ali. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.